One of the most talked about findings in all of ancient Egyptian history was the remarkable story of the Egyptian pharaoh King Tutankhamun's tomb. Before the year 1922, King Tutankhamun, most notably known as King Tut, was only a myth, and not one of the most notably known pharaohs in recent history. There were many famous pharaohs in Egyptian history, such as the early pharaoh King Khufu of the Third Dynasty, builder of the largest pyramid on earth, the Great Pyramid, or even his more famous son, Chephren, also known as Khafre, builder of the most elegantly constructed pyramid on earth, known as Khafre's Pyramid. Even the great pharaoh Thutmose, who famously bridged the gap between Upper and Lower Egypt. But no, this is the story of a little-known king, actually one of little significance. In fact, he was such of little importance that his reign only lasted a short time, and it was cut short by an untimely death. During his reign, he didn't really bring any major changes to Egypt. One of the reasons for that is that King Tut was very young and very sick. He took the throne when he was only about 9 years old and suffered from a variety of serious health conditions. He was deformed, he had a huge club foot that destabilized his posture, so much so that he couldn't walk well and had to walk on crutches. This king, bringing little or no major fanfare in ancient Egyptian historical events of note, and in his short reign offered no real importance and no real influence on Egyptian society in any way. But what we do know about him is that the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb preserved the ancient Egyptian culture and legacy so well that we happen to learn more about the ancient Egyptian culture from King Tut's tomb than all of the information that was available to us before. The greatness and splendor of ancient Egypt and the marvels of everyday Egyptian life was finally preserved in illustrious splendor. All of the fine details preserved so extremely well that it gave us new interpretations about the history of ancient Egypt, and it greatly expanded our knowledge of Egyptian life so well that the discovery of this single tomb became one of the most important historical discoveries of our time. With the introduction of this great discovery of King Tutankhamun, we were able to peer into the greatness of a long-forgotten past, a past that we would have never known and would have never experienced. This is the story of King Tutankhamun, his past, his present, and his afterlife. King Tutankhamun, born circa 1341 BC, died circa 1323 BC, also referred to as King Tut. He was an Egyptian pharaoh who was the last of his royal family to rule during the end of the 18th dynasty. His rule lasted from circa 1332 BC to circa 1323 BC. During the New Kingdom of ancient Egypt, His father believed to be the pharaoh Akhenaten, one of the most famous figures of the ancient Egyptian world, recently identified as the mummy found in tomb KV55. His mother is known to be his father's sister, as marrying within the family was greatly practiced at that time. It is debated as to whom Tutankhamun's real mother was. Was it Queen Nefertiti, which was herself a major figure in Egyptian culture? Or was it another woman, identified through DNA testing as an unknown mummy, referred to as the younger lady, who was another mummy found in tomb KV35, along with the pharaoh Amenhotep II. Some scholars say that this person, the younger lady, is also Nefertiti. Whomever his real mother was, Tutankhamun and his family sure had their share of controversy during his reign and even before it. Tutankhamun took the throne at an early age, 8 or possibly 9 years of age. Under the close guidance of his eventual successor named A, simply spelled A-Y, to whom he may have never been related. He married his paternal half-sister, Ankhesenenum. During their marriage, they lost 2 daughters, one at 5 to 6 months of pregnancy, and the other shortly right before birth. These fetuses have been preserved and mummified and was found in the tomb along with Tutankhamun. Modern DNA testing of the fetuses has determined that they are indeed the offspring of King Tutankhamun. His names Tutankhaten and Tutankhamun are thought to mean living image of Aten and living image of Amun, with Aten replacing Amun after Akhenaten's death. A small number of Egyptologists believe that the translation may be incorrect and closer to the life of Aten is pleasing, or one perfect of life is Aten. One of the biggest accomplishments of Tutankhamun's reign was the restoration of ancient Egyptian tradition and religions after the religions were removed by his father Akhenaten. King Tut enriched and endowed the high priest of the 2 most important cults of the land, and he also began restoring old monuments damaged during the previous Amarna period. He reburied his father's remains in the Valley of the Kings and relocated the capital of Egypt from Amarna back to Thebes. These acts were greatly favored by the high priest, giving Tutankhamun a positive image amongst his people. Tutankhamun was very slight of build and physically disabled with a deformity of his left foot, along with a condition known as bone necrosis, which required the use of crutches. Several canes and crutches were found in his tomb. He also had other health issues, including scoliosis, and had even contracted several different strains of malaria. The 1922 discovery by Howard Carter of Tutankhamun's nearly perfect preserved tomb was a major achievement. In excavations funded by Lord Carnarvon of England, the discovery received worldwide press coverage, with over 5,000 artifacts found in the neatly preserved tomb, It gave birth to a renewed public interest in ancient Egyptian culture. Tutankhamun's famous golden mask now sits in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. It remains a popular symbol of ancient Egyptian glory and splendor. Some of these findings have traveled the world with remarkable interest. The Egyptian Supreme Council of Antiquities allowed tours of the findings starting in 1961. And since the discovery of this nearly perfect intact tomb, King Tutankhamun's name has been most commonly referred to as King Tut, which is more easily pronounced and dispersed to the masses. Who was Tutankhamun? Tutankhamun, whose original name was Tutankhaten, or Tutankhwaten, was born during the reign of his father Akhenaten, in a time period during the late 18th dynasty of ancient Egypt. Akhenaten's reign was characterized by a dramatic shift in ancient Egyptian religion, known as Atenism, and the relocation of the capital city to the site known as Amarna. This period became known as the Amarna period. Toward the end of the Amarna period, two other pharaohs appear in records who were apparently Akhenaten's co-regents or co-rulers. Nefer-Nefer-Uaten, a female, who may have been Akhenaten's wife Nefertiti, or his daughter Merenptah and son Smenkhara. Nefer-Nefer-Uaten, which some scholars would say is the same as Nefertiti, is now thought to have become co-ruler shortly before Akhenaten's death, and even sometime after it as well. An inscription from Hermopolis refers to Tutankhaten as a king's son, and he is believed to be the legitimate son of the pharaoh Akhenaten. While some scholars' interpretations have been made that Tutankhamun's mother was Menkaten, the second daughter of Akhenaten and Nefertiti, based on a stone relief from the royal tomb at Amarna. This possibility has been deemed unlikely given that she was very young, only about 10 years old at the time of her death. Another interpretation of the relief names Nefertiti as Tut's mother. Tutankhamun also had a private nurse, a woman named Maya, known from her tomb at Saqqara. In 2008, genetic analysis was carried out on the mummified remains of Tutankhamun and others thought to be known to be New Kingdom royalty by a team from the University of Cairo. The results indicated that his father was the mummy from tomb KV55, identified as Akhenaten, and that his mother was one of the mummies found in tomb KV35, known as the Younger Lady, who was found through DNA testing to be a full sister of her husband. The team reported that they were over 99.9% certain that Amenhotep III was the father of the individual in KV55, who was in turn the father of Tutankhamun. More recent genetic analysis, published in 2020, revealed Tutankhamun had the haplogroups Y-DNA R1b and mtDNA K, both of which originated in the Near East. He shares the Y haplogroup with his father. the KV-55 mummy Akhenaten, and grandfather Amenhotep III, and his mtDNA haplogroup with his mother, the younger lady, his grandmother Tai, and his great-grandmother Thua. Upholding the results of the earlier genetic study. The profiles for Tutankhamun and Amenhotep III were incomplete, and the analysis produced different figures despite having similar results. Because the relationship of these two mummies with the KV-55 mummy had previously been confirmed in an earlier study, the haplogroup prediction of both mummies could be derived from the full profile of the KV-55 data. When Tutankhaten became king, he married Ankhesenpeten, one of Akhenaten's daughters, who later changed her name to Ankhesenaten. They had two daughters, neither of whom survived the pregnancy. While only an incomplete genetic profile was obtained from the two mummified fetuses, it was enough to confirm that Tutankhamun was their father. Likewise, only partial data from the two female mummies from tomb KV-21 has been obtained so far. Tomb KV-21A has been suggested as the mother of the fetuses, but the data is not significant enough to allow her to be properly identified as Ankhesenaten. Tutankhamun's death marked the end of the royal line of the 18th dynasty. Ancient Egypt continued to prosper during the 14th century BC, while religion started to play a more important role in the lives of Egyptians as well. A bold new pharaoh named Akhenaten attempted to upend centuries of tradition by forcing the people of Egypt to abandon their variety of gods in favor of worshipping one single god, which was named Aten. Despite being labeled a crazy man and a rebel, Akhenaten introduced the most radical concept of monotheism to the world during his reign, and it went on to change the course of human history forever. Akhenaten was given the name Amenhotep at birth, meaning Amun is content. He was the second son of Amenhotep III and his principal wife, Queen Tai, Tutankhamun's beloved grandmother. As a younger person, the rank of pharaoh fell to Akhenaten after his older brother, Thutmose, died suddenly as a young man. And upon his father's death in 1353 BC, he was crowned Pharaoh Amenhotep IV in the ancient Egyptian city of Thebes, ascending to the crown only as the 10th ruler of the 18th dynasty of Egypt. He married the legendary Queen Nefertiti, making her his great royal wife and the royal queen of ancient Egypt. Despite Amenhotep having multiple wives, like many Egyptian pharaohs did, records show that Nefertiti and Amenhotep shared a remarkable, loving, close, and intimate relationship that eventually produced at least 6 daughters. Nevertheless, Nefertiti rose to become a very prominent and influential queen, fulfilling her role as only the second most powerful person in all of ancient Egypt. A famous limestone bust of Queen Nefertiti, sculpted by her royal sculptor Thutmose, has made Queen Nefertiti one of the most influential and recognizable ancient Egyptian figures of all time. This elegant bust is well known for its remarkable lifelike detail, beauty, and symmetry of the timeless beauty that Nefertiti has become. The strong facial characteristics, strong jawline, and compelling beauty propelled the essence of Queen Nefertiti into the daily lives of so many wanting to know more about the remarkable characters and splendors of the ancient Egyptian world. At the time of the ancient pharaoh Amun's ascension to the pharaoh's throne, the worship of many gods was common in ancient Egypt. Aside from the most famous gods being worshipped at the time, such as the god Ra and the god Osiris, Amun became the most worshipped god of the entire Nile Valley, and he was the most important god of many religious cults in Egypt at the time. Despite the differences in gods and practices, these cults all had a common factor. They were generally based on the universal belief of balance and eternal harmony. The cult of Amun had been growing in strength and influence for centuries, and by the time of Pharaoh Amenhotep's reign, his royal family had amassed as much wealth and status as some would say as being equivalent to the richest family in the world. In fact, this family was so rich that even priests of the Amun cult were said to have owned more land than even the pharaohs themselves. And for the newly anointed Pharaoh Akhenaten, this situation may have fueled the power, desire, and drive that eventually led to the serious actions taken by Akhenaten. For the first 5 years of his reign, Akhenaten continued to allow the worship of all of the other traditional Egyptian gods. However, likely influenced by his influential mother, Queen Tiye, the pharaoh's attention eventually focused on one particular god in general, the god Aten. Amun was a major ancient Egyptian god. Amun was identified as being from the Old Kingdom, together with his wife Amunet. In the 21st century BC, Amun rose to the position of patron god of Thebes by replacing the previous god Montu. After the rebellion of Thebes against the Hyksos, and with the rule of Ahmose I, 16th century BC, Amun acquired national significance, expressed in his fusion with the sun god Ra as Amun-Ra, also known as Amun-Ra or Amun-Re. Amun-Ra retained chief importance in the Egyptian pantheon throughout the New Kingdom, except under the pharaoh Akhenaten. Amun-Ra in this period, 16th century to 11th century BC, held the position of transcendental, self-created creator god par excellence, or the number one god. He was the champion of the poor and troubled people, and central to the idea of personal pity. Along with other gods such as Osiris, Amun-Ra is the most widely recorded of all of the Egyptian gods. As the chief god or deity of the ancient Egyptian world, Amun-Ra's influence was so strong that he also came to be worshipped outside of Egypt. And according to the testimony of ancient Greek historians and scholars, he came to be identified as Zeus in Greek mythology. Amun-Ra was also known to the ancient Egyptians by other names, including titles such as the Supreme God, or he was held with extremely high regard in the world of ancient Egyptians, symbolized by the ram representing fertility and war, both two powerful forces in humans. Amun was not always known by the name Amun. Originally, Amun-Ra was known simply as Ra, who was recognized as the supreme sun god. The story goes that he not only created himself, but he was also the creator of the entire universe. In ancient Egyptian religious belief, Amun was known to have so much power that some scholars believe that the ancient Egyptians actually held a monotheistic belief. Ra is also credited with creating many stories known to the Egyptians. He is also credited with bringing light to the sky for the people on Earth and the underworld, demonstrating his eternal power. Alternatively, Amun was a patron of pharaohs and combined with Ra and was later known as Amun-Ra, the ultimate ancient Egyptian god. Although to the Egyptian people Amun-Ra was a highly important god, they could never imagine the influence that he would have not only in the present, but also the influence he would have all the way into the future. Amun-Ra was so powerful to the Egyptians that his worship eventually influenced the Greeks, and the idea that Zeus, according to the Greeks, was the king of gods for them. Amun-Ra's notoriety was received so far and wide that some would say he also had an influence on other religions, including modern-day Christianity and Judaism. Christianity and Judaism, the two major Abrahamic religions that are still massively practiced today. It is clear to say that Amun-Ra had a major influence on different religions, Abrahamic or non-Abrahamic, that occurred in the future after the eventual downward spiral of the ancient Egyptian empire. In general, the combinations of the sun god Ra with Amun, the patron of pharaohs, began a system of imagining a god with two sides. One that explained nature and the universe, and one that carried a concern for the individual person. Even though the ancient Egyptians focused more on the actual pharaohs themselves, its evolution to having a concern for the individual person demonstrates the start of a shift from tyrannical rule to a more humanistic one. The god Aten is described as being the sun disk, the great disk of the sun that was originally an aspect of the sun god Ra, the greatest deity, in all of the ancient Egyptian world. It is also artistically depicted as a solar disk emitting rays with small hands on the ends. The famous stele of Akhenaten appears to show the royal family being touched by the rays of the Aten. Worship of the Aten was not a new thing, and even the previous pharaoh Amenhotep III had exalted the god Aten above all other gods, but never to the same extent as his son Akhenaten did. As a sign of his dedication to the god Aten, the pharaoh changed his name in the 5th year of his reign from Amenhotep IV to Akhenaten, which was translated to mean living spirit of Aten. By his 9th year as pharaoh, Akhenaten, King Tut's father, was so influenced by the symbology of Aten, he declared Aten to not only be the supreme god, but the only one worthy enough to be worshipped in all of Egypt. This remarkable declaration is considered to be many the birth of true monotheism. Monotheism, a belief in only one God, as opposed to polytheism, the belief in many gods. But Atenism is preferred best described as monotheism because its followers worshipped a single god without denying the existence of other gods. There was a great controversy during the period when Akhenaten ordered the temples dedicated to Amun be vandalized or destroyed, and that images containing any other god other than Aten be banned. He had references to Amun and all other gods chiseled out of monuments all throughout Egypt. He defaced religious monuments. Akhenaten eventually declared that he was God, Aten's only messenger, and he went on a long and brutal campaign uprooting priests and other religious leaders from Egypt. The other main ruling powers at that time viewed this sudden shift towards the god Aten, or as we call it, monotheism, as a significant threat to the Egyptian empire. But they still mostly went along with Akhenaten's reformations. Many priests of Amun hid texts and artifacts, saving them from Akhenaten's wrath. Towards the end of his reign, Akhenaten went as far as to declare himself and his wife Nefertiti both actual gods and demanded that they were both worshipped as such. Meanwhile, the common people of Egypt referred to Akhenaten as the heretic king and considered him an evil tyrant who had abolished Egypt's traditional religious gods and rituals. In the same year in which Akhenaten declared Aten to be the only god, the pharaoh also ordered the design and construction of a new capital city, which was to be named Akhetaten, meaning horizon of Aten. The city of Akhetaten was more commonly known as Amarna. The pharaoh chose to build his new capital far away from the old capital and in the center of Egypt, between the old city establishments in Thebes in the north and in Memphis to the south. He viewed the new city Amarna as a faraway metropolis that he could build a new religion and altogether remove reminders of any of the old gods. Using his family's vast wealth and power, Akhenaten erected a stunning array of large temples, monuments, and structures throughout this new city. The city was very new, but it was very strange indeed. One of the strange things about this new city was the temples were built without roofs. Even though exposure to the bare elements eventually became a problem for this new city, the strange design was claimed by Akhenaten to help the sun's rays fall freely upon his worshippers. The city was built facing the east and was precisely as to direct the morning sun rays towards the temples and doorways. Akhenaten's roofless temples were obviously not praised by everybody. Actually, the situation was getting harmful for his reputation. The roofless temples actually began to frustrate many of the royal messengers and envoys who were sent to Egypt. In one situation, an Assyrian king once wrote to Akhenaten regarding this matter, and was quoted as saying, "Why are my messengers kept standing in the open sun? If it does the king good to stand in the open sun, then let the king stand there by himself and die in the open sun." Akhenaten's reign was met with its share of controversies, but the situation was helped by the honor and beauty of his loving wife, Queen Nefertiti, who was so well respected and influential that the couple was still able to reign in Egypt for 17 years. As this love story continued, Akhenaten and Nefertiti would journey from one end of the city to the other by horse and chariot, mimicking the journey of the sun across the sky. Akhenaten and Nefertiti's unique reign is often referred to as the Amarna period, since many pharaohs prior to Akhenaten destroyed the notion of Amarna and the notion of Aten being the only god, and reinstated all of the other old gods of ancient Egypt and Thebes as Egypt's original capital. Akhenaten didn't really have a flair for politics and rulership, but some would say he may have had a really keen design sense. But the latter activities may have been considered not his style, or even beneath him. After all, being a self-proclaimed god such as himself was a full-time job by itself, because he never had time for politics and often neglected matters of state and diplomacy. After the previous pharaohs, such as his father, worked hard and tirelessly to strengthen international ties in Egypt, Akhenaten's behavior was a major disappointment to not only the people of Egypt, but to its traditional trading partners and allies as well. The pharaoh didn't avoid all diplomatic matters, just those that didn't personally interest him. In fact, if you were an ally of ancient Egypt at the time of Akhenaten, you might have found yourself questioning your friendship to this man. If you needed military aid for any conflict, Akhenaten was the last person you would have wanted to depend on, as noted by quite a few statements of allies of the time. His attention was primarily focused on religious reform. Godlike attributes of himself and life within his palace. After 17 years of controversial rule, Akhenaten passed away and was entombed in a necropolis east of Amarna. Burial instructions found on a stone stele in the capital reads, "Let a tomb be made for me in the eastern mountain of Akhenaten. Let my burial be made in it, in the millions of jubilees which the Aten, my father, decreed for me." In the years following his death, Akhenaten's sarcophagus was since vandalized and destroyed. Images of him were erased from all monuments. His mummy was removed from the necropolis, and speculators have suggested it may have been reburied in the Valley of the Kings. But properly identifying Akhenaten's corpse has been a major challenge for archaeologists. A reconstruction of his corpse is currently located in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. Akhenaten was succeeded briefly by two pharaohs, named Smenkhare, who reigned for 1 year, and Neferneferuaten, who reigned for 2 years, before his son Tutankhamun, whom he fathered with his wife Nefertiti. And some would go as far as saying Nefertiti was also Akhenaten's biological sister. Their reign marked the end of the Amarna period and the end of the monotheistic styled religion, or some would say the worship of a single god. Upon ascending to the throne, Tutankhamun's advisors convinced the young pharaoh to reject Atenism and restore the traditional worship of Amun and all of the rest of the old gods of ancient Egypt. Tutankhamun agreed, and his elders and advisors agreed to make this change. He changed his name, changing it from his original birth name, Tutankhaten, to the new name, Tutankhamun. Tutankhamun also neglected his father's capital city of Amarna and re-established the old city of Thebes once again as Egypt's new capital. Tutankhamun's successors, one notably known as Horemheb, destroyed and dismantled many of Pharaoh Akhenaten's monuments, and even used the rubble for his own construction projects. Horemheb violently went above and beyond to erase Akhenaten's name from Egypt's historical records, and did such a remarkable job of erasing Akhenaten's works that Akhenaten's name doesn't appear in any of the well-known kings list compiled by future Egyptian rulers. It seems many people wanted to erase Pharaoh Akhenaten from history, but until recent times, through DNA testing, we are finally able to get a glimpse of this pharaoh's life. The discovery of the Amarna site in the 19th century is the primary reason that Akhenaten's existence is known to the world today. Ironically, Akhenaten is now one of the most well-recognized pharaohs in all of ancient Egyptian history. While many of the other pharaohs have remained unknown and forever vanished into obscurity. Although he may not have been much liked as a pharaoh and viewed as a heretic, after his reign, modern historians and scholars tend to view this religious revolutionary under a new light. as Akhenaten is the first monotheist on record. It is proposed that Akhenaten indeed had an impressive and lasting impact on global and world religion. Psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud once said that even though atheism existed before Akhenaten, it was Akhenaten who added the something new that turned monotheism, the doctrine of a universal God, the quality of exclusiveness. Sigmund Freud speculated that the pharaoh's devoted followers were forced to leave Egypt after his death and were then led by an atheist priest named Moses. The creation of the religion Judaism cannot be directly linked to atheism, but there are several remarkable similarities between the two faiths. Regardless of this possible connection, Akhenaten's radical religious reform is thought to have been a major influence on the future development of monotheistic religion around the globe. Whether his ambition was to suppress the rising power of Amun at the time, or maybe he really did experience a religious revelation, his rejection of polytheism set a major precedent that would go on to impact the course of religious history forever. In addition to that, an Egyptian priest named Manetho wrote a comprehensive history of the ancient Egyptian kings, where he refers to a king named Horus, who had ruled for 36 years, had a daughter named Akencheres, who ruled for 12 years, and a son named Rathosis, who ruled for 9 years. The Amarna rulers are placed central in this list, but which name corresponds to whom is not agreed upon by the Egyptologists or scholars. Horus or Akencheres have been identified with Harem and Akhenaten, and Rathosis with Tutankhamun. These names are also associated with Smenkhara, Amenhotep III, and the others in different orders. Tutankhamun was just a child, between the ages of 8 and 9, when he ascended to the throne and became pharaoh, taking the throne name Nekhpuru. His reign lasted for approximately 9 years. During his reign, the young king had many advisors, and the position of principal vizier had been split between Upper and Lower Egypt. The principal vizier for Upper Egypt was User-Montu. Another figure named Penju also took the role of his advisor. And Tutankhamun had a third advisor named A. A was also Tutankhamun's eventual successor. A gold fragment from tomb KV58 seems to indicate that A was a well-known priest of Mat, along with the title of Vizier, doer of Mat. The title does not refer to the usual description used by a regular vizier, but might indicate an informal relationship or title. In other words, A was an extremely close confidant of Tutankhamun. The title does not refer to the usual description used by a regular vizier, but might indicate an informal relationship or title. In other words, A was an extremely close confidant of Tutankhamun. Kings were venerated after their deaths through mortuary cults and associated temples. Tutankhamun was so adored by the masses that he was one of only a few kings who was worshipped in this manner during his lifetime. A stone stele discovered at Karnak and dedicated to Amun-Ra and Tutankhamun indicates that the king could have even been appealed to in his godly state for forgiveness and to free the petitioner from his sins. Temples of the Tutankhamun cult were erected as far away as Nubia and Kawa. The title of the sister of the viceroy of Kush included a reference to the deified king, indicative of the appeal of Tutankhamun's worship during his lifetime. Tutankhaten was believed to mean living image of Aten. However, not all specialists and scholars agrees with this interpretation. Others speculate that this interpretation is wrong, and the name truly means the life of Aten is pleasing. After he was crowned pharaoh and after he took counsel with the god Amun, Tutankhamun made several financial endowments that enriched the priests of the cults of Amun and Ptah. He commissioned new statues of the gods from the best metals and stone in the world, and he had new religious structures made of the finest cedar from Lebanon, and had them embellished with fine gold and silver. The priest and all of the attendants, including singers, dancers, and other entertainment, who had their previously abolished positions restored, and royal protections were added for their security to ensure the safety of these groups and for the future stability of Egypt. Tutankhamun's second year as pharaoh began to return to the old Egyptian order. Both he and his queen removed Aten from their names, replacing it with Amun, and moved the Egyptian capital from Amarna back to the city of Thebes. He renounced his father's god Aten, relegating it to obscurity, and returned Egyptian religion to its polytheistic form, where the worship of many gods were practiced. His first act as pharaoh was to remove his father's mummy from his tomb at Akhetaten in Amarna and rebury it in the Valley of the Kings in Thebes. This act helped strengthen Tutankhamun's reign. He rebuilt monuments, steles, shrines, and buildings at Karnak. He even added additional works at Luxor as well as commencing the restoration of other temples throughout Egypt that were pillaged by his father, Akhenaten. Akhenaten left the country economically weak and in turmoil. Diplomatic relations with other kingdoms had been weakened, and the young King Tutankhamun sought to restore them, in particular with the Mitanni. The Mitanni was an Indo-Iranian empire that centered in northern Mesopotamia that flourished from about 1500 to about 1360 BC. At its height, the empire extended from Kirkuk and the Zagros Mountains in the east through Assyria to the Mediterranean Sea in the west. Egypt's victorious battles with this group, such as the notably known Battle of Megiddo, which inspired the term Armageddon, which was led by a previous pharaoh named Thutmose III. Battles and diplomatic ties with this empire allowed Egypt to become the dominant power that it was. Evidence of King Tut's success is suggested by the gifts from various countries found in his tomb. Despite his efforts for improved relations with his neighbors, there were still some battles with Nubians and Asiatics that were recorded in King Tut's mortuary temple at Thebes. His tomb contained body armor, folding stools used for military campaigns, bows, arrows, and it is known that he was well trained in archery. However, physical disabilities. Most historians speculate that he actually did not personally take part in any of these battles, but we may never know. However, it is not impossible that King Tut was skilled in archery, that even with his deformities could have still played a crucial role in battle. Although it is quite possible, by being such a young and adored king, that these bravery-styled attributes might have been just thrusted upon him as a type of honorary symbol or rally call for members of his clan. Given his age, the king most likely relied heavily on his advisors, which most notably included A, who eventually succeeded him, and General Harembe. Harembe recorded that the king appointed him lord of the land, hereditary prince to maintain the law of Egypt. He also suggested that his keen ability to calm the young king every time his temper flared up, which as a teenage king probably did many times. In the third year of Tutankhamun's reign, that is, when the boy king reversed the changes made during his father's reign, he ended the worship of the god Aten and restored the god Amun back to supremacy. The ban on the cult of Amun was lifted, and traditional privileges were restored to its priesthood. The capital was moved back to Thebes, and the city of Akhetaten in Amarna was abandoned. As part of this great restoration, the king initiated building projects, in particular at Karnak, in Thebes, where he laid out the Sphinx Avenue leading to the temple of Mut. The sphinxes were originally made for Akhenaten and Nefertiti. They were given new ram heads and smaller statues of the king. At the temple of Luxor, he completed the decoration of the entrance colonnade of Amenhotep III. Monuments neglected or defaced under Akhenaten's reign were restored, and new cult images of the god Amun were created. The traditional festivals were celebrated again, including those related to the Apis bull, Hormaket, and Opet. The temples of the gods and goddesses were in ruins. Their shrines were deserted and overgrown. Their sanctuaries were as non-existent, and in their courts were used as roads. The gods turned their backs upon this land. If anyone made a prayer to a god for advice, he would never respond. A building called the Temple of Nekparu, beloved of Amun, who puts Thebes in order, which may be identical to a building called Temple of Nekparer in Thebes, a possible mortuary temple. Used recycled talatat from Akhenaten's East Karnak Aten temples, indicating that the dismantling of these temples was already underway. Many of Tutankhamun's construction projects were incomplete at the time of his death and were completed or taken over by his successors, especially Harembe. The Sphinx Avenue was completed by his successor A, and the whole project was taken over by Harembe. The restoration stele was renewed by Harembe. Pieces of the Temple of Nekparu in Thebes were recycled into Harembe's private building projects. Tutankhamun was slight of build and roughly 5 foot 6 inches tall, or 167 centimeters. He had large front teeth and an overbite characteristic of the Thutmosid royal line to which he belonged. A study of the garments found in his tomb, particularly the measurements of his loincloths and belts, suggests that he had a skinny waistline and rounded hips, very similar to a petite woman. In various attempts to explain Tut's unusual depiction in art and his early demise, it has been theorized that Tutankhamun suffered from the genetic disorder gynecomastia. But actually, he suffered from a variety of ailments. In addition to gynecomastia, he also suffered from something known as Marfan syndrome and Wilson-Turner intellectual disability syndrome, Froelich syndrome, Klinefelter syndrome, androgen insensitivity syndrome, aromatase excess syndrome, in conjunction with sagittal craniosynostosis syndrome, and other ailments. It is also suggested that he also inherited epilepsy, which can be passed down through bloodline. This can also explain the early deaths of his great-grandfather Thutmosis IV and his father Akhenaten. a disease very common in Egypt, as Egyptian pharaohs were known to interbreed, often marrying their own sister, brother, or first cousins. In 1980, author and scholars James Harris and Edward F. Wendt were conducting X-ray examinations of several New Kingdom pharaohs' crania and skeletal remains, which included the mummified remains of Tutankhamun. The authors determined that the royal mummies of the 18th dynasty bore strong similarities to contemporary African Nubians, with only slight differences. Stuart Tyson Smith, an Egyptologist and professor of anthropology of University of California, Santa Barbara, in 2008 expressed criticism of forensic reconstruction. He noted that Tutankhamen's face was depicted as very light-skinned, which actually reflected a bias amongst media outlets. Smith added that Egyptologists have strangely been reluctant to admit it, but Egyptians were closely related to dark-skinned Africans, especially the farther south in Egypt one goes. Recently, in July 2005, Tutankhamun's mummy was CT scanned. The results showed that not only did he have a partially cleft left foot, scoliosis, and a myriad of other diseases. Additionally, he was repeatedly infected with malaria. His malaria infections may have caused a fatal immune response in his body, or possibly triggered circulatory shock. CT scan also showed that he had also suffered from a compounded leg fracture. Embalming substances were present within the fracture, indicating that it was associated with an open wound, and no signs of healing were present. A facial reconstruction of Tutankhamun was carried out in 2005 by the Egyptian Supreme Council of Antiquities and National Geographic. 3 separate teams, Egyptian, French, and American, worked separately to estimate a true description of the face of the boy king. While the Egyptian and French teams knew their subject was Tutankhamun, the American team didn't know. All the teams produced similar results, but it was that of the French team that was ultimately recognized as the truest reconstruction. There are no surviving records of the circumstances of Tutankhamun's death. It has been the subject of considerable debate and major studies. Dr. Zahi Hawass, Egypt's foremost Egyptologist and Director of Antiquities, Hawass and his team argues that this death was likely the result of the combination of multiple weakening disorders, including malaria, a leg fracture, and perhaps the result of a fall. However, some have argued that sickle cell anemia better fits the cause of death of the young king. Even though there is widespread theory that King Tut was possibly murdered out of jealousy to take the throneship away from him, and even murdered by somebody extremely close to him. No evidence of bone thinning or calcified membranes, which could be indicative of a fatal blow to the head, were found. One of the remarkable things about the 1922 discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb was that the tomb was so immaculately well preserved. We were really able to get a glimpse of what the actual ritual of mummification was like. And Tutankhamun's tomb only proved it was more splendid than what we could ever imagine. Early photos from the discovery shows the most preserved details of the mummification process that was ever recorded. Tutankhamun was buried in a tomb that was unusually small considering his status. His death may have occurred unexpectedly, before the completion of a grander royal tomb, causing his mummy to be buried in a tomb intended for somebody else. This would preserve the observance of the customary 70 days between death and burial that ancient Egyptians had. His tomb was robbed at least twice during antiquity, but based on the items taken, including oils and perfumes, and the evidence of restoration of the tomb after the intrusion, these robberies likely took place within several months at most of the initial burial. The location of the tomb was lost because it had come to be buried by debris from subsequent tombs and workers' houses that were built over the tomb's entrance. The concession rights for excavating the Valley of the Kings was held by Theodore Davis from 1905 until 1914. In that time, he had unearthed 10 tombs, including the nearly intact but non-royal tomb of Tutankhamun's beloved grandmother, Queen Tiye's parents, Yuya and Thuya. As he continued working at the site in later years, he uncovered no major findings. Davis did find several objects in tomb KV58 referring to Tutankhamun, which included knobs and handles highlighting his name, most notably the embalming cachet of the king, tomb KV54. He believed this to be the pharaoh's lost tomb and published his findings with the line, "I fear the valley of the tombs is exhausted." In 1907, a man named Howard Carter was invited by William Garstin and Gaston Maspero to excavate for George Herbert, 5th Earl of Carnarvon, in the Egyptian Valley. Howard Carter had talent as a sketcher and artist. At the age of 17, he joined the British-sponsored Archaeological Survey of Egypt. Although very young, Carter was innovative in improving the methods of copying tomb decoration. In 1892, he worked under the supervision of Egyptologist Flinders Petrie for one season at Amarna. From 1894 to 1899, Carter worked with Edouard Naville at Deir el-Bahari, where he made drawings of sculptures and inscriptions at the temple of Queen Hatshepsut in ancient Thebes. This work propelled his career, and he was made Inspector General of the Egyptian Antiquities Department. On an exercise of supervising excavations in the Valley of the Tombs of the Kings in 1902, he discovered the tombs of Hatshepsut and Thutmose IV. In 1907, he began his association with the 5th Earl of Carnarvon, a collector of antiquities who had sought out Carter to supervise excavations in the valley. Lord Carnarvon married Elmina Victoria Maria Alexandra Wombwell, alleged to be the illegitimate daughter of millionaire banker Alfred de Rothschild of the Rothschild family in 1895. Rothschild provided a marriage settlement that was equivalent to $75 million. Extremely wealthy due to his marriage settlement, Carnarvon was at first best known as the owner of racehorses and race cars. In 1903, he suffered a serious race car accident in Germany, where he never fully recovered. He then moved his passions and interests into ancient Egyptian history and became a very inquisitive amateur Egyptologist, and even purchased Egyptian artifacts and antiquities for his collection in England. In 1907, Lord Carnarvon undertook to sponsor the excavation of nobles' tombs in Deir el-Bahari, near Thebes. He employed Howard Carter to undertake the work, on the recommendation of Gaston Maspero, current director of the Egyptian Antiquities Department. In 1912, Carnarvon published 5 years' exploration at Thebes, co-written with Howard Carter. In 1914, Carnarvon received the permission to dig in the Valley of the Kings, replacing Theodore Davis, who had resigned. Howard Carter again led the work, taking on the extensive search of the valley for any tombs missed by any previous expedition, in particular that of Pharaoh Tutankhamun. Excavations were interrupted during World War I, but were later resumed in 1917 after the war. They kept searching until 1922, but by that time, no major discoveries have been found. Budgets were running low, and Lord Carnarvon decided that this would be the last year that he would fund the campaign. However, on November 4th, 1922, a major breakthrough had been made. Howard Carter was able to send a telegram to Lord Carnarvon in England, saying, "At last we have made a wonderful discovery in the valley. A magnificent tomb with seals intact, recovered, same for your arrival. Congratulations." Lord Carnarvon was utterly ecstatic. What can these findings be? He rushed over to Egypt, accompanied by his daughter, Lady Evelyn Herbert. They swiftly traveled to Egypt, arriving on November 23rd, 1922. Both were present the next day when the full extent of the stairway to the tomb was cleared and the seal containing Tutankhamun's cartouche was found on the outer doorway. This door was removed and the corridor was cleaned from debris, finally revealing the doorway to Tutankhamun's tomb. Carter made a tiny hole in the top left-hand corner of this doorway, enabling him to look inside by the simple light of a small candle. When Lord Carnarvon asked, "Can you see anything?" Howard Carter replied, "Yes, wonderful things." The area was then secured, to be entered only in the presence of an official of the Egyptian Department of Antiquities the very next day. However, the story goes is that Carter, his assistant Arthur Callender, Lord Carnarvon, and Lady Evelyn apparently did make an unauthorized visit, becoming the first people in modern times to enter the tomb. Some sources would suggest that this group also entered the inner burial chamber. It is speculated in this account that a hole was found in the chamber's sealed doorway, and Carter, Carnarvon, and Lady Evelyn crawled through. Some would say it was sure luck that allowed the tomb to survive in its preserved state all the way until modern times. The tomb's entrance was buried by mounds of debris and the cutting of tomb KV-9 over 150 years after Tutankhamun's burial. Ancient workmen's houses were also built on the very exact site over the years. This area remained unexcavated until 1922 due to its proximity to tomb KV-9. Howard Carter started the excavations in early November 1922, before the busiest part of the tourist season got underway. The first step of the tomb's entrance staircase was uncovered on November 4th, 1922. According to Howard Carter's account, the workers came across it when they were digging beneath the remains of the ancient worker houses. The men were actually digging outside of the assigned work area, an area in which was disregarded when they came upon the discovery. By February 1923, the antechamber had been cleared of everything except for two statues. Witnesses, which included Lord Carnarvon, several Egyptian officials, museum representatives, and the staff of the Government Press Bureau, were selected for the main tomb opening event. And on February 17, 1923, at just a little after 2 o'clock, the seal to the tomb was broken. There were 5,398 items found in the tomb, including a solid gold coffin, thrones, archery bows, trumpets, a chalice, furniture, food, wine, sandals, and even fresh linen underwear. After the discovery of the tomb, Carter then spent another 3 years excavating Tutankhamun's tomb. Since the coffin had been sealed for over 3,400 years, Howard Carter and his team finally began the tedious task of opening King Tut's coffin. They first began to lift the coffin's outer lid. After a successful removal of the first lid, another burial shroud was exposed. Carter carefully begins peeling the burial shroud back. He discovers a second gilded coffin, even more extravagant than the last. But this layer is much different from the shroud. It is so heavy and ingrained in the material that it had to be hoisted out of the first coffin using a series of pulleys and levers. After this second coffin is successfully hoisted out, it reveals glorious amounts of precious ornaments and decorations of luminant glass with sparkling colors of blue and green and red. But upon closer inspection of the second coffin, it appears to Howard Carter and his team that there was even more coffin inside. After more tedious attempts to open the second coffin, finally the third and last coffin of Tutankhamun is revealed. A breathtaking experience. The coffin was covered with a thick black perfumed material that obscured what was to be found later. Skillfully using many tools such as hammers, chisels, solvents, and heat apparatuses, Carter and his team finally removed the obsessive material. Alas, Tutankhamun's golden mask is revealed for the world to see. All the two outer coffins are made from wood and had an outer covering of gold. The third coffin was made entirely out of gold, solid gold. Such an elegant display of craftsmanship as performed by the ancient Egyptians. Tutankhamun is seen laying there in a golden sarcophagus, holding a crook and flail, the ancient Egyptian symbols of royal power. It wasn't just the gold. Tutankhamun's mummy was covered in precious jewels and precious stones, and his mask was inladen with marvelous decorative glass. Prior to this discovery, there had never been seen a pharaoh that was laid exactly as he had been buried by the priests 3,500 years ago. Many tombs of other pharaohs had long been pillaged by thieves wanting to gain riches from the various buried treasures. This finding gave us keen insight into the intricate processes used by the Egyptians into the burying of their dead. The image of the golden mask travels around the world quickly, and Tutankhamun's discovery begins to spark intensive interest of many people around the globe. As Carter struggles to remove the mask from the mummy, the highly sensitive beard becomes detached. A braided beard, a style that was popular at the time. When the beard was removed, we see Tutankhamun's bare face. It truly reveals King Tut's true boyish characteristics. Even though King Tut's tomb was the most well-preserved tomb to ever be found, it was still not a very big tomb, and was actually very small as compared to the other pharaohs. This was not the tomb of a major pharaoh, but indeed it was more like the tomb of a wealthy teenage boy. He died so young and unexpected that there was not enough time to finish an official royal tomb. Many of the funerary objects and contents were thrown together quickly as to deal with the unexpected death of King Tut. Carter took 10 years to catalog all of the various items, including a dagger recovered from the tomb that had an iron blade made from a meteorite. A study of the artifacts inside the tomb revealed many other insights and findings into ancient Egyptian culture. King Tutankhamun's tomb provided valuable clues regarding metalworking technologies in North Africa and the Mediterranean area at the time. Many of Tutankhamun's burial items showed signs of being customized for his use after being originally made for somebody else. Most likely his brother Smenkhare, or maybe perhaps his mother Nefertiti. On November 4th, 2007, Tutankhamun's mummy was placed on display in an underground tomb at Luxor, in Egypt. The mummy was removed from its golden sarcophagus to a climate-controlled box. The box was specially designed to prevent the high rate of decomposition caused by humidity and warmth from the tourist bodies entering the tomb. In 2009, the tomb was closed for restoration and then reopened in February 2019. Tutankhamun's fame is primarily the result of his well-preserved tomb and the global exhibitions of his associated artifacts. The discoveries in the tomb were prominent news in the 1920s. Tutankhamun came to be called by a modern name, King Tut for short. King Tut became the name of a multitude of products, businesses, and everything else. By 1978, an exhibit called The Treasures of Tutankhamun was touring the United States. Tutankhamun's artifacts have traveled the world with unprecedented viewership. The exhibitions began in 1962, when the Louvre Museum in Paris arranged an exhibition of Tutankhamun's treasures. The exhibition attracted over 1.2 million people, as well as British photographer George Rainbird, who rephotographed the collection in color. The new color photos, as well as the Louvre exhibition, began a Tutankhamun revival. In 2005, Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities, in partnership with Arts and Exhibitions International and the National Geographic Society, launched a tour of Tutankhamun treasures and other 18th century dynasty funerary objects, called Tutankhamun and the Golden Age of Pharaohs. The exhibition drew more than 3 million people. The star power of King Tut is only now starting to unravel. Approximately 3,400 years after his death, King Tutankhamun is only now starting to shine brighter than ever. And actually, many pharaohs in ancient history were proven to be more recognized than King Tut. But by today's standard, and his tomb being preserved so well for all to see, King Tut has actually proven to be more recognized than even some of the greatest of all conquerors of ancient Egypt. We may never know the incidents surrounding Tut's death, But what we do know today is that in his short life, he lived a rather great one, disregarding his ailments. To have the complete support of your people, and to be not only a teenage king, but one so revered that even cults were made out of you, all the while receiving the loving support of a great mother and grandmother. King Tut was, is, and will truly be loved indeed. Where will King Tut take us tomorrow, and the tomorrow after that? We may never know. But it seems, after 3,400 years, his popularity just keeps on growing. And as we move to a new, brighter, technological world, we only still just know a little bit, and we don't know a lot about Tutankhamun, nor about his life, death, or his family. But one thing we know for sure is that his life, although very short, was indeed pleasing.